Yeah. So design is not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it's work. So this is the famous quote said by Steve Jobs. So hello everyone, welcome back with another amazing live session. Today's session is all about design. Why do we design and some design processes? So it's our pleasure to have Shubham with us today. He's a former DSC lead, a full stack web developer. Welcome Shubham on the DSC PGDAV platform.
Hey, so Majid, thanks so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and yeah, I hope that today's session like really adds value in terms of like what I have to share, and I hope that also to the listeners. And yeah, like we hope it will be a great time. I would need
Yeah,
like a minute to set up the slides and everything. So
yeah,
in
sure,
while we throw open
sure.
the live stream, we can just have like our audience talk and like have a share their expectations as like what they are looking forward to in the session and what are the things they would like me to talk about. Maybe these are the things I haven't thought of including.
Mm-hmm,
And so if you can just go about and talk about it in the comment section, in the chat section, always like devote a couple of minutes to that. So feel free to go ahead and say what are the things you're expecting, and we can get ahead
yeah,
with that.
yeah. So if you have any questions, you can put them down in the comment sections and we would love to take it towards the end. So I hope everyone is on the live stream. So you can show the thumbs up on the comment sections and tell about how you are exciting about this session. You can write this on the chat section.
Hey Himanshu.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
Himanshu has
well
something
said,
to say
Himansh.
already.
Yeah, designing is an art.
Designing is
I
art.
want to know.
I want to know how to embrace it. Um, we would be addressing it in a session. Basically, the difference between web designing and web development. Cool.
Yeah.
So, should we wait for another couple of minutes and have like a few other people join in, or should we like just get started right now?
Yeah, we will start it within a minute. Let's join other members also.
Sure.
So Shubham, how's your lockdown going on? So, my question.
Um, the better part of the lockdown happened in the first half, where I slept a lot and got catched up on my loss. That was a good part
Yeah.
in the very first half. But I think like as the situation progressed and as we got a measure of what exactly is going on across the country and across the world at large, uh, I think it
Mm-hmm.
affected us in a way we could not have imagined when everything kicked off. So when everything abruptly
Mm-hmm.
shut, I think all of us were expecting it to be like a short 1 2 month affair, which would be contained, and then we can move about and go back to our normal lives. Of course, that did not happen.
Mm-hmm.
uh, and things, while they are getting better, they are still not fully under control. So I think at this point we should think about taking the necessary precautions that need to be there,
Yeah.
so that they not rise any further and we can contain the threat as much as we can. And also
Mm-hmm.
from the medical system of our country has been on a tremendous strain for the past few months, and not just our country, at the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's basically on humanitarian grounds as well that we should follow the safety precautions and guidelines, so that even the doctors and the nurses and everyone taking care, every frontline worker taking care of the patients, even they can take a little breath.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
Yeah.
at this moment, all we can do is take care of ourselves, take care of the ones around us, and just hope that this thing blows over.
Yeah, absolutely.
Himanshu has another question. Will it survive in future? I mean, software can take on the big part. Only big jobs will be left, I guess. Himanshu, I would maybe request you to clarify, like, what exactly do you have in mind when you talk about only big jobs will be left? Like, I get the part where you can say that. I think you're referring to the GPT-3 enabled Figma plugin, which can kind of design on its own. So, if that is what you're referring to, then what exactly are is big jobs that would be left in that hearsay? All right. I think Himanshu will be typing out his response, and it's already
Yeah,
6 now.
I
And I
think we
think,
can start now. Yeah,
yeah, sure thing. So, hello everyone. My name is Shubham. That's my Twitter handle at Shubham360. And like whenever you have any questions, if you have any doubts or something, post this session or anything, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter because that is where I'm the most active. And like before, Himanshu, before I answer your questions, there are a few things we would go over. And in the course of that, maybe we would, maybe that would answer some of your questions. And if it does not, I would pick it up and like answer them one by one. So before we get started and before we go on any further, let's just talk about what is this talk about. Uh, this talk would fundamentally be about the reason we design things. We design softwares, we design products, we design machines, we design buildings, bridges, roads. This talk is not going to be strictly limited to digital or product or UI or UX design. We would be referring to those things, but this is not strictly about designing of a specific or a niche segment. This is the reason why we're talking about designing at large and not about any specific area. The next thing is we need to take a look at what is the need of design, because design is not merely pushing pixels. At the age and time when we are living in, design is not just about how that button would look, what should be the border radius, what should be the box shadow. But at this age and time when we are standing, our designing principles or designing philosophies and thought process should be more about should be more focused on our users, should be more focused on how we can make lives easier for them. And the second part is how we can solve a problem, if not fully, maybe to a certain extent, partially, one third, one fourth. How depends on how much importance your organization or your project accords to design. And that is what we would be talking about, like how we can solve a problem with the design. What is this talk not going to be about? We are not going to be talking about how to design using a design tool. Like that is a basic gist of it that we are not going to talk about. Because let's be honest, like designing, once you understand the fundamental philosophies of it, once you understand how to design a certain thing, understand how to design once you understand the thought process behind designing a certain product or a machine or a building or a road, it's not about which tool you are using at large. For example, if you're a web designer or if you're a UI developer or something like that, and you want to use something like say Figma or Adobe XD or something like that, it's not super difficult to get started with them because A, they are pretty intuitive on their own, and B, even if you think they're not intuitive, I think most of us who have grown up with computers have used MS Paint. And in MS Paint, all of us start off with using either the pencil tool or drawing rectangles. When you when you go ahead and start designing with these design tools, that is more or less the first step that you need to know about how to make rectangles. When you make rectangles of different shapes and sizes, then you move ahead to more different shapes. Then you move ahead to vectors and other different things. Then you talk about color palettes and shadows and effects, and that is how you have your own design. So that is not what we're going to talk about here. A tutorial about design tools is a separate talk altogether, and we will be covering this later. So moving on. So before I talk about things, let's move on to the question that the design session is entirely titled over. Why do you design? Like when you think about design, why do you think you should design, or why do you think people should design at large? Anyone, like just put down your thoughts in the comment section in the live chat. I keep on forgetting, messing up between those two. So why would you want to design something? Why would you want to improve the look and feel, aesthetic or something? What does design mean to you? Is it something like improving the aesthetic, improving the look and feel, improving how a certain button looks? or is it something else? I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have in mind. So like feel free. Uh, so Surya thinks it's more to attract viewers. That's a good thing. Attracting viewers and improving a design to make sure that you get a good segment of users is a good thing. Decoration. All right. All right. That's a good thought. What else? Anything else you have in mind when you think about why should you design or what is the need behind design? We have another one for to be more attractive for clients. Huh, that's a good one. But anything else? Anything else that you have in mind? Why should you design? Like what is the need for designing? Like if I don't make a site super attractive to look at, but just get its basic functionality to work as intended, does that not qualify as a good design? Or is it always have to be that I have to follow something like Google's material design guidelines, make buttons a certain way, make menus look a certain way? Is that the case? And if that is the case, then why do you think that should be the case? So that is what I'm kind of keen to look forward to. All right. So most of you think that it is because to make things more attractive and to uh, attract viewers. That's a very good point that I would be touching base on. And now I would answer the second part of the question. Why do I design, or why do most designers design, right? One of the fundamental reasons behind that is not just to improve the aesthetic. It's not just to improve the colors and improve the decorative look and feel of how things work. Because if you see a lot of times, not lot, a lot, most of the time, when a big redesign happens and a site suddenly starts to look a lot more cool, a lot cleaner, a lot more exciting, you would see that the site or the product face a huge backlash. When the big Snapchat redesign happened, there was one tweet from I think Kylie Jenner, and the entire valuation of Snapdown went down several notches. Like its stock value fell like 9 pence. So what is it about design? Like it shouldn't just be about improving the aesthetic and improving the color, because the Snapchat redesign did that. They made their app even more cleaner. They added new graphic elements. They made it more decorative. So what is it? What was it that was missing that allowed that Jenner tweet to go out and Snap stock to free fall? So if you look at that, if you look at it from the perspective of a product designer or from a company, that why do I need to redesign an app or redesign my website or redesign my product in general? We have a few more comments here. To be more attractive, it won't get traction, people won't come and you won't earn. Shrutika Tanawade says something interesting. This saves our time, resource, and money. Interesting. That's very interesting. And Shrutika, thanks for bringing this up. I'll be touching base on this, but this is a super cool answer to have come up with. Okay. Another myth that I should debunk is we do not design just for the look and feel of a certain thing. Even before you start to code, even before you start developing something, you design the entire architecture. You design the entire flow. You design the entire information flow. You design how the data should flow from one module to the other. That is also a part of a component of design. Maybe that is not the same as UX or UI or visual design at large. Maybe that is not what is generally referred to as product design at large. Heck, like if you talk about 10 years ago, and you talk about design, the only thing people would talk about is software design, where you design architectures or design the data and information flow. 10 years back, UX as a term did not even exist. Like 10 years back, if you were a designer, you would have to be a Photoshop pro. Nowadays, you have tools like Figma that makes it super easy to design. So when tools are not a hindrance, what is the reason that we start designing? Let's take a look at that answer. One of the very first reasons that we think about designing is making it easier to use the product. No matter what product you're building, no matter when you're building it, it's imperative to first try and make it as easy and intuitive to use as you can, right? At this time and age, in the 21st century, in 2020, soon to be 2021, time is money, right? Attention engineering is a vast field, and that applies to design. Every single moment, there are at least 10 different products that are screaming for your attention. And whatever has a better design, whatever has a better positioning, whatever has a better way to grab your attention would earn more money. That is basically how the world works at this moment. That is how the world of products is going towards at this moment. And when everyone is vying for attention, when everyone is trying to grab your attention, your job as a designer would be to make their work easier. Everyone should just be able to walk up to your product or just open your product and just be able to use it. As a designer, it's not nearly enough to make your site or your app or your product or your machine to be easier to open or start. It should be easier to use. Like if the main function of your app is to scan and send documents, it should be easier and imperative from the word go. Like they should open the camera and they should see a button that says scan or something else of that sort, which would make them not think about the process that they have now gone into the app. Now what? How would they address the process? How would they address the problem that they had come to your product to solve? How would they scan and send the document? So the very first reason we design is to make it easier to use the product. Every single time when a new Android release comes out, or if you look at Android releases, say from ice cream sandwich to Kit Kat to say marshmallow, you would see there a vast difference in design senses. Like it was almost at every single stage, there was an entire redesign of the entire Android platform. Menus were getting renamed, every icon was getting changed, things were getting shuffled around. Because at that point in time, Android was maturing as a system. And every single stage, the designers in the Android team were trying to make the product, the operating system, easier to use with every single iteration. And that is what you have to do as a designer. Every single stage, you have to keep on thinking about what are the ways you can improve the quality of what you're building. You have to improve the usefulness of what you're building. As a designer, your very first job when you're building a product is to tell a story. When you're telling a story, when you're telling a user how to go from point A to point B, that is when you succeed as a designer. And of course, when you tell a story can be a good or a bad. And that in turn will evaluate your proficiency as a designer. There are amazing design teams that happen to tell a bad story and that creates a huge backlash. There are small design teams that tell amazing stories that lead to their products becoming huge successes overnight. And that is what you have to aspire towards. When you build a product, your product should just not be a collection of screens and buttons and user input forms and everything else. It should be a process. It should be a story. When user moves from screen to screen, every single screen should be a part of that story. For instance, let's talk about the Twitter app or the Facebook app. Or let's just go even simpler. Let's talk about something as fundamental as Google Docs that we use more often than not. When we use Google Docs and when you open it, you would see that when you open Google Docs, there's an onboarding screen. Like there are 3 different slides that tell you what you can do with the product. This is another concept pioneered by Steve Jobs. The concept was that don't tell the user what the product can do. Tell the user what they can do with the product. And if you go and download an older version of Google Docs and go through that old slideshow that tells what you can do, like you can edit and save documents on the fly, you can make documents wherever you are, you can share it with anyone. That is the main principle behind Google Docs when it was made. And that is what the story they were trying to tell. And once you are done with that slideshow, you enter the app and there you have that big floating action button, which tells you to start making a document. And when you open a document, it's again super easy to start writing and saving and sharing. So whatever they advertise in the first 3 slides ties back neatly to what happens when you see the product as a whole. When you start using its features, that is what it ties into. When you open the app, the slideshow tells you can write on the fly, you can share, and you can do everything anywhere and share it with all the people. As soon as you open the app, the first prompt you get is to create a document, because that is the first part of the entire process of using the app, right? You open the app, you create a document. Then once you create a document, you write your stuff, then you go ahead and share it with your colleagues, your friends, your co-workers. So that is how everything works. You have to tie all the components of your product together into a single woven story. I see a lot of questions coming up about how storytelling is related to designing. Okay, let's think about it this way. If the product designers had not talked about what the app is supposed to do in the initial slideshow, would you have just opened the app, seen a big action button, wouldn't have wondered, I wonder what this button does. I wonder how I'm supposed to navigate this app. I wonder what this action menu up on top does. You would be confused with the n different options that you can click on. You'd be confused with the n different things you can do with the app. You'll be like, okay, I'm on this screen. There are three different buttons here. What would happen if I click on this, if I click on this, if I click on that? But suppose that two buttons, out of the three buttons, there are two buttons which you cannot even click on until you create a document. And if you did not have that opening slideshow telling you to create a document and then making it pulse gently to grab your attention so that you know that that is the button you're supposed to click, you would not have known that clicking on those two buttons would not have done anything. You would have kept on clicking those two buttons. They wouldn't have resulted in anything. You would have gotten frustrated. You would have deleted the app from your phone. So by enhancing the user experience and creating a coherent storyline, that is what the designers of that team did. They built everything into one cohesive narrative. They tied everything into one single thread. So that whenever a user enters the app, in a single thread, they know what to do and how to use the entire app. This is something we have been hearing a lot about in the last few days, and weeks. This is the rebranding of the quite iconic Google logos to the Google Workspace logos. So I would not say this is a good move or a bad move, but I would say this move makes sense. The reason people are hating this transformation of the previous icons into these new icons is one of the very same reasons all of us fell in love with material design. Let me tell you why. When Larry Page returned as the CEO of Google in mid 2000s, in the first decade of the 21st century, what happened was Google had at least 40 different products. They had Maps, they had Android, they had Calendar, they had Mail, they had Search, they had Earth, and all of those things. And every single one of those looked different. Like if you stopped looking at the name of the product, you would not know that it's all from the same company. When he came back, the first instruction Larry Page gave was make sure that every single product looks like they are from the same company. And when this instruction went out, that is when material design was born. That one cohesive design language, that one cohesive design system that tied all the entire Google ecosystem into one single visual look. Now, if you look at a certain Google product, you would know it's from Google because it's based on material design. Every single design that Google does now is based on material design. And over the years, material design has matured a lot. And we have come to recognize it as something very iconic related to Google. The reason these icons became these sort of icons is the same. And the reason is bringing coherence. When products and product logos look a lot different, there might be confusion among users. And while today a lot of us are complaining about the fact that all of those Google logos look like single blobs of color, or they look like blobs of 4 same colors, and it would be difficult to discern from them, yes, I would admit that there are maybe a few accessibility problems, which I think the designers would also be aware of, and they're working towards to maybe address and fix those things. But if you take a design tool and look at the hex codes of every single one of this color, you would see none of the hex codes are the same. The blue in the red color in the new Gmail logo versus the red color in the Google Meet logo. If you look carefully and if you find their hex codes, you would find that they're different. And this is done particularly to access this issue of accessibility. And when we talk about people not accepting this coherence, people thinking that these are all just big blobs of color, you would know that at a certain stage, you would come to accept them. Because a few years back, another thing had happened. The big Instagram redesign, where Instagram's entire look and feel changed, when the Instagram logo turned from the instant camera to this lines, circles inside a rainbow background. I would admit we all hated it. Most of us hated it. But the reason we hated it was not because it looked bad, but because it took time for us to adjust, and also because of one another thing for which design is a really important part of today's world. And that is, today people check their phones like at least 50 to 60 times a day. the apps they use, the services and products they use, and the phones that are always parts of them, that have become a part of their identity. And when these have become a part of their identity, a single change to the identity causes a lot of panic, causes a lot of loss in, like, suppose your brain is used to seeing one single thing for years, for days, months, weeks, years, and suddenly, and you have become habituated to seeing that, and you love that product, you use that, and that has become a part of your everyday life. But after a few days, people started loving the new Instagram logo. It's not that Instagram lost users because there was a new logo. It's not that people left Instagram for some other platform because there was a new logo. And the reason people did not leave was there was no other proper competing product for Instagram. The only other product that could compete with Instagram at that point in time was Facebook, and Facebook owned Instagram. So there was no literally any point going anywhere from Instagram. So when the users built the product, they designed it in such a way that it would be a one single value proposition point for all users coming in. And when people hated the design, it took them some time, but at the end of the day, they got used to it. But the reason all of this happened, the reason the Facebook redesigns are happening so frequently nowadays, the reason the Google redesigns happened, the reason the logos got changed, is simply because of the fact that all of these companies want to bring a single brand coherence. They want all of their subsequent subsidiary products to look like they've originated from the same company and not 5 different companies. And that is one of the major things we need to ensure while we are designing. And that is one of the major reasons we design. Releasing features or bringing functionality is a hard problem. There are a lot of questions I see in the live chat. Do not worry, I would address this. I will address all of this. But okay, let me, like, before I go ahead and explain what is bringing functionality and releasing features means, let's just address some of the questions that I'm seeing here. Surya has a question, what is material design? So Surya, material design is a design system developed by Google. And this is like an open source design system. Anyone can go to material.io and they can build their own design system on top of material design. A lot of other companies have their own design systems. Microsoft has a Fluent design system. Apple has a human interface guidelines, of course. Then you have Salesforce has a Lightning design system. And a lot of different companies. Airbnb has their own, Uber has their base design system, IBM has the Carbon design system. So all of these companies, what they're trying to do with design systems, that they are trying to build a distinct visual appearance for themselves, which is different from other companies or other entities or other brands at large. Surya loved the rebranding. All right. Okay. We would come and touch base on the difference between UI and UX later in the talk. So I'm just going to skip that for now. Moving on. So yeah, bringing functionality. When you release a new feature, it's not like the engineers code it and just release it out in the wild. That is not how product designing or like product release cycles work. When a new feature is released, you have to think about how to showcase that feature, right? If a new feature is released and it is hidden far underneath 10 different menus so that no one looks at it, it does not really make sense. It does not really make sense to add that product, add that feature or add that functionality if no one uses it. As an example, again, if I go back to Instagram, recently, like a month back, maybe Instagram released Instagram Reels as a response to TikTok, right? So before releasing Reels, the Instagram design team had 3 to 5 different iterations going on. They had made 5 to 6 different iterations to find out where to show Reels in the entire app in a way that it would not disrupt people who are already fond of the existing app versus people who want to actually see Reels and discover new things using the Reels feature. So these are things you have to keep in mind as a designer, that you cannot fully disrupt an existing user flow versus you also have to keep the business recommendations into mind and make sure things are made in a way so that you can use them and you can showcase it in a way that is non-disruptive and not disturbing your existing base of users. Of course, sometimes you might introduce a headlining feature in a way that, it's like a disrupting feature. It's bang in the center of your home screen. And everything that you do, keep in mind what the users will need. Maybe what you think is, okay, this layout, I think this would work. another designer in your team thinks, okay, I think this layout would work. Remember, when you're designing, at the end of the day, you're not designing for yourself. We are not designing for ourselves. Even though we use the apps, we're designing for the broader range of users who would be using the same product that you are building, right? At the end of the day, you have to consider about all the different age groups, all the different demographics that use your product, and the different challenges each of them bring. For instance, if you have built an app for young kids and then you're going to build an app for the elderly and senior citizens, the considerations and assumptions that you had for the kids app and the considerations and assumptions you would have for the senior citizen app would not be the same. So when you're designing, forget what you are designing. And as a tip, I would say, do not get too attached to your designs. Do not get locked in by your designs. Keep an open mind, and so that at the end of the day, there would be times when you would have to throw away your entire design and make the entire thing again from scratch. It is difficult. It is hard. But you would have to do that because at the end of the day, your users, you need to give your users the best experience, not what is just easy for you to make, right? Hemant has a question: what to keep in mind before designing an app and what to ignore while developing one? So Hemant, this is not what to ignore while designing one. So Hemant, I think this is not an absolute question, and a lot of different other factors also come in while you're thinking about this, right? So for example, there are things you can ignore while developing. There are different things you can ignore while you have a good budget. There are different things you have to ignore while you do not have a good budget. There are different things you have to assume and ignore when you're building for a certain age group versus when you're building something which does not have any age group barrier, right? So, but the fundamental principles that we have to keep in mind while we are building or designing anything, the first thing is remember who you're building for. And remember and try to keep in mind the things that they would like. Try to leverage existing mental models. For example, if you're building a social media app, maybe it makes, and unless you want to truly reimagine the social media experience, maybe it makes sense for you to kind of take the mental model people already have from using apps like Facebook, Twitter, and then maybe do your improvisations, do your improvements, do your own disruptions on top of that, so that people don't have to learn to use your app from scratch. The second thing you have to keep in mind while you're designing absolutely is do not clutter. I have a lot of designers I've seen is what they try to do is they focus more on the visual aesthetic. They focus more on how the app would look at times and not how the app would behave. For instance, login flow is not something you need to reimagine, right? How a user logs into the app or signs up to an app or a product is not something you need to reimagine. That is something already established. So this is kind of like a third point, maybe I would say, where I would say that you should not waste time on things that are already have a precedent, that are already established, that are kind of good enough so that they don't need to be disrupted. And then you have to focus on the part where you truly want to disrupt and improve the user experience. When the login flow is done and the user enters your app, enters your website, enters your product, that is where you have to redesign and make sure you add value over your competitors. You add value over other things of the similar nature, other things of a similar maturity. And that is where you have to spend more of your gray cells on. Another thing I want to say, embrace white space. This ties back to my earlier point of not cluttering your app. And that is like, use white space. Keep your app clean, keep it coherent. And the last thing I would say is always keep accessibility guidelines in mind. That make sure if someone is colorblind, or say someone who has some other problems or defects, so that they can not use the product like most of us can, you have to keep in mind the considerations based on that. For instance, if you deliver a message based on just one color, so maybe you just add a banner to the top of the page in red color to indicate danger. What about colorblind users who cannot see the color red? It would not be easily clear to them what that banner means because they cannot see that color. What would happen if you just use an icon to represent something? What if a thumbs up represents something in your country and your culture and your demographic? It might represent something totally different in some other country. So maybe if thumbs up means hello in India, thumbs up might mean what are you doing and how has been your day in Philippines, for example. So So this distance, this difference in meanings due to icons and these things are something you have to keep in mind. So accessibility guidelines are something you should always keep in mind whenever you're designing something. Most of the times I've seen people keep accessibility as an afterthought. And like once they're done designing, then they come back and like maybe tweak the colors a little bit, add an icon, improve an icon, change an icon, add a text label here and there so that the design can be called accessible. But I would say keep accessibility in mind from day one so that you don't have to go back and like, figure out again what this was supposed to do. And then you have to figure out ways to improve and iterate on for accessibility. That is something you should always keep in mind. All right. We talked about feature positioning and design based on that. Let me give an example based on how this feature thing worked when I was working in a company. So what we are building was we were trying to build a new type of video call platform. What we decided from our research, we came to understand that existing video call platforms like Meet or Zoom or Teams, they were not fully catered to a kid's classroom. That kids need something different, something more nuanced, something more interactive, which was absent in every single one of these platforms. So during our course of research, we decided to build our own platform. And while we were building this platform, we realized that since ours was a browser-based video calling tool, there are quite a few things we need to check. We need to check if a network is good. We need to check if the audio works. We need to check if the video works. We need to check if the user has given permissions for us to work. Then we have to check if even if the user has given permission for the camera to work, we have to figure out whether the camera actually works on the device. So these are different contingencies we had to see. And the very first iteration we built that kind of created confusion in the mind of users. So what we were doing was there was an initial screen that shows connecting you to the classroom. And then when we encountered any error, we showed a screen like this, which was just an error message piece of graphic. And then we just told the user what to do to figure out a way around that. For example, if we did not support Firefox and you open this in Firefox, we would tell you that, hey, man, we do not work in Firefox. Please open this link in Chrome. And we give you an option to copy the meeting link, right? And that is how it worked. But we figured that people were not quite reassured with that. And there were people and there were students and teachers who were telling us that every single time they're trying to log in the platform, they were secretly scared as to what might go wrong. And like when they finally reached the classroom, they heaved a sigh of relief. So that is problematic, right? Whenever someone is entering the classroom, you do not want them to be stressed over the fact that whether all the devices work or not. The reason we tried to build this feature was to relieve them of this stress. And turns out what we had built was kind of adding on to it. So what we did was we did an iteration where we did this. We added an extra checklist. And in this checklist, we showed them while we were doing the evaluations. When we saw that the browser was okay for the user to use, we gave it a tick mark. We moved on to video check. We moved on to audio check. Whenever any of the tests passed, we gave it a tick mark. If any of the tests failed, we showed the user a message and how to improve on that, right? And this improved user experience by a hell lot. Teachers stopped complaining about the stress they were having while entering the classroom. And while in the earlier iteration, in this iteration when we're talking about, there were repeated calls to our customer service department where they're telling, hey, I'm stuck on this screen. What should I do next? What should I do this for? What should I do that for? And then when we moved on to this screen, there are far less calls because people were now reassured that the tests have passed. They know they can see for themselves what did not work out and the steps they can take to solve that. And that is how it kind of worked out. And that is how we improved on our entire journey. And that was super helpful. For us. What else? So that is how we improved on our design. That is how we introduced a new feature. That is how we designed a new feature to help people. The next thing is design offers you a new perspective. Whenever you try to redesign something from scratch, whenever you try to redesign something or build something or improve something existing, as a designer, you get to see multiple perspectives. You get to talk with users who give you their own peace of mind as to the things they think need improvement. And when you get these multiple perspectives, as I said before, when you're designing something, when you're designing a product, you are not designing for yourself. You are designing for the hundreds of multiples of users that you are serving for. And at that point in time, you have to think what they need. And having a different perspective helps you in breaking deadlocks and building something that's truly helpful. And in this time, when everyone is vying for time and attention, having a new perspective that helps people save time, that helps them get some new things, that helps them improve their experience in their and in their day-to-day lives, that matters a hell lot. And when we talk about a new perspective, that now is where we move on and we talk for a few minutes on what is UX versus what is UI. Can anyone tell me what is the full form of UX and what is the full form of UI? Because once you kind of reflect on the full forms and what this word stand for, it would kind of seem self-explanatory what these things are intended and meant for. Anyone? Any answers? Like, what does UX stand for? Okay, the chat is silent. All right. Yeah, that's the correct. That's a good answer. UX stands for user experience, and user experience just does not mean how your apps look. When I talked about telling a story through your entire app, through your entire product, that is kind of the story of user experience. When you're talking about user experience, say you are a user experience designer, you are a UX designer. At that point in time, what you need to do is you have to figure out more about the user journey. You have to figure out more about how the user travels through your entire app or your website. You have to figure out how to make that entire journey easier and more fruitful to the user. You have to figure out things like how can I decrease the time it takes for users to say create a document? How can I decrease the time it takes for users to share a document? How can I decrease the time taken for users to edit a shared document? Things like these, like questions that affect our experience, like improving the time, improving the improving the visual things it takes. So these are things that kind of tie up to UX. When we talk about UI, that kind of ties in more to the visual design and like building rectangles at large. When I talk about UI, I talk about like drawing rectangles on screen and adding colors and adding box shadows, adding illustrations and drawings, and figuring out how exactly the screen should look like. That is what we refer to as UI design. When we talk about UI design, that is what we talk about. Like this is like you can see clearly see a difference. When I show you these screens, I would say when the person sat down and built these screens, he was acting as a UI designer because he was making rectangles and designing screens, right? When I talk about show you about this is more about having wire flows like wireframes and user journey maps and everything else. If you want to know more detailed, so you talking about UX and UI can become a whole separate talk on its own. So if you want to know more about that, you can go to a channel called King Siddharth on YouTube. If you search for that, he has some amazing sessions which kind of truly describes and separates what is meant by UX and UI, right? So his is a channel you can check out, and you can learn more about the differences between these different roles. But if I have to talk about in gist here, UX is more about designing the entire experience and designing the entire flow that the user goes through. And when you talk about UI, it's about what the user sees with their own eyes. And that is what we talk about when we talk about UI. That is a major fundamental difference that we have. And that is what kind of separates these two things. More often than not, you cannot be either a UX designer or a UI designer. More often than not, when you're starting off, you are usually both, because most of us start off as students, right? So when we are starting off as students, most of us are like, we are working on a personal project, we're working on a side project. And at that point, we have to don all sorts of different hats. We have to figure out what the user journey should be like. And then we have to figure out what the screens should look like. Bigger organizations can afford to have separate UX and UI designers. But in most of our cases, we have to wear multiple hats and we should have multiple skills. Because at the end of the day, unless you can figure out why a certain flow is a certain way, it kind of also becomes difficult to design screens in a certain way. So all of these things that about UX and UI, they're kind of interrelated, right? I would say they're two sides of the same coin. You can separately address them, but at the end of the day, it's kind of beneficial to you if you know both of them and kind of have experience in both of them. So that is another thing. So before we go any further or wrap up this show, I would kind of go back to the chat and address some of these questions. So to kind of wrap up in just what I've entirely said over this entire time, why do we design? We design not just for aesthetic, we not just for colors, not just for typography, not just for illustrations and screen designs. We're designed to bring a coherence. We're designed to attract our users' attention. We're designed to save our users' time and not waste any of it. We're designed to bring about a coherent change in feature rollouts. We're designed to make sure nothing is abrupt and everything is kind of coherent and slow and flowing and everything works in a gradient. We're designed to make sure things become easier for our users. We're designed to ensure lives become better and people don't have to spend time figuring out what to do. In retrospect, if we talk about Indian banking websites, say for instance, most of them I would not say they need some UI change for like I would not change the UI a whole lot for Indian banking systems. What I would do is improve their UX. I would improve the way information flows. I would improve the way the user has to go from one point to the other. I would improve the way certain fields are named. For example, in a recruitment test I had a few days back, I got my login details and there it was named as username and password. While logging in on the platform, I saw those fields were named differently. They were not called username and password. They were called uh, they were called um, examinee ID and passkey. So since these field names were entirely different, they create a disruption in the mind of a user, and they kind of have to figure out, okay, the email that I had gotten about like username and password and the field I'm seeing now, do they belong to the same thing? Will it work if I enter these details in this form? When you design, make sure these sort of discrepancies do not come up. And that is why we design, to make things simpler and easier and more coherent. That is the basic gist of it. There are a lot more reasons why we design. And I think it's impossible to cover it in a single talk, in a single day. We have already been talking for over, I think, half an hour, 40 minutes. So this is where we would wrap up today and we would answer a few questions. But of course, if you are more keen on design, if you want to know more about UX, UI, product design at large, feel free to hit me up on my Twitter. And I would just go through a few questions now and get to what are these things. So one of the questions I had seen earlier is, let me just scroll up once. Designing, will it survive in future? I mean, software can take on the big part, only big jobs will be left, I guess. So to answer this question, first of all, I would say design is here to stay. No matter how many machines we build, how many softwares we build, because designing is a creative process. And no matter how advanced our machines are, they cannot always get creative enough to fulfill our exact requirements. A few days back on Twitter and YouTube and maybe Facebook, a video went popular about a user entering details on Figma that make a form with a big blue button and two input fields. You need someone to design those components that were rendered, right? Like whenever you're designing a button, how much blue is blue enough? How much gray is gray enough? That is not something a machine can determine. You would need a human sitting behind that machine trying to figure out if that gray is gray enough for a blind user to comprehend. You would need a user to figure out if a design is playful enough, if a design is serious enough, if a design is useful enough. And these creative metrics are not something that would go away. And as time goes, these type of jobs, I think, would only go on increasing. And if you're good at that, you do not have to worry about machines or software taking up your job, because designing has always been a creative process and it would remain to be so. And at the stage at where we are, there is, I won't think there is much risk of machines taking away our jobs at this stage. So I hope that answers your question. Hemlata asked a question, how to design an app for farmers, mostly uneducated. How simple we can go to get our data using icons. So Hemlata, what you're trying to do here is you're trying to build an app for farmers, and you're trying to represent most of it using pictorial representations in icons and pictures and so on, right? You're trying to use less of text. So in this case, what I would say is, instead of you trying to think and figure out, or instead of me suggesting to you that use this kind of icons and all. I think what is more effective is you design something, you design a few different kind of icons which you think are relevant, go to a farmer, show him the icons, and ask him if it makes sense. And I know it's difficult, but maybe you can connect with a farmer over a video call or something if they have access to that. If you cannot, reach out on different social media platforms. There will always be someone willing to help you out there. Do your research, and I think research is something that is very important in this particular respect, because the demographic you're designing for, your target group are farmers, like, and as you say, mostly they're not used to using the products we are building. So in those cases, we would not be the right person to assume that it's things they know or things they don't know. So it would be more beneficial if you kind of design a few icons, design a few data points, uh, go to them or like get in touch with a few of them and see what they can perceive. Maybe if you want an icon to say, click on this to select the weather, you might have to go through 5 or 6 different iterations of that icon before you find out if you find out a farmer saying, excuse me, farmer saying that yes, this is the icon which when I see, I think okay, I can click on it and I can get the weather for the next 10 days. So I think this is an iterative process, and I think you should do a user research on this and kind of try to figure out what are the things you need to do. But I think it would be beneficial for you if you try to keep using the, like, for designing the icons. What I can give you a heads up on is maybe try using the elements that the farmer sees and uses on a day-to-day basis. Maybe when they talk about the weather, they talk about maybe they talk about whether they think about rain and thunderstorm and the sun. So maybe these are elements you can use to design a weather app. But the way you lay them out and the way you arrange them might differ when you do a user research, when you show them and ask them if that pictorial representation kind of tells them that it's about weather. Or maybe when you want to give them some news, maybe when they think about news, they think of a radio. So maybe a radio icon would give them an idea that, okay, if you click on that, you would get more news. So things like that is I think this is an iterative process, and there is no hard and fast starting or ending point for this. But yeah, if you start off with using elements that the farmer kind of encounters on a day-to-day basis, I think that's a good place to start off with regarding this project. How are a UI UX and a web developer is interlinked? Surya, personally, I started off as a developer, and the thing is, from day one, I used to design what my sites are going to be looking like. If you do not design what your sites are going to be look like, or at least if you have no idea what your sites are going to look like, you're going to spend far more time writing code than you would have had if you had a design. So even if you don't want to go to design tools like Photoshop and Figma and draw out a full high fidelity design, I would suggest at least take a piece of paper, take a notebook, take a pen, maybe draw a layout of how you want your site to look like. That would decrease the time it would take to design your entire layout of your entire site, because now you have a reference and you use a reference, write the exact code needed and get done with it. So as a developer, if you have a design, if you have a design ready in front of you, that decreases your development time. And that is a very good thing to have, I think. And when we talk about interlinking, I think when you're a student, it's kind of useful to explore different genres and fields. So that when I started off as a developer, it was not because I wanted to develop and build things at large. It's because I wanted to build, when I was in school, I wanted to build a social media platform. And I used to design a lot of the screens on paper. And the thing is, at that point in time, I did not have enough skills to kind of build a social media platform. So that is why I got into engineering and development, because I had designs, I had an idea, I wanted to be able to build that out. So I think development, web, app, or anything else, and UI and UX are very much closely interlinked, because what you design is what you ultimately try to build, right? And that is a good practice and exercise on both of those grounds. If you design something that helps you build up your design muscle, and if you take the design that you have done and try to code it out, that helps you build your coding muscle, because now you have constraints. But now when you see that a certain layout is kind of difficult to build, you cannot give up, because that is a project you've undertaken, that I have to build out this design. That is kind of what you push yourself towards and build it out. And that is kind of the idea that is how it kind of helps. But I don't think this answer helped you very much, but if you want to discuss more on this, maybe hit me up on Twitter and we can have a chat about this. So are there any more questions that need to be taken up, but or like we are good? Samarjit, I think you are on mute. Uh,
Yeah, I think there are no more questions. All the questions are resolved. So I think with this we are towards the end, and I believe that it's a very insightful sessions, and all the viewers have learn a great thing about what is design and how design works. So thank you, Shubham, for joining us and enlighten us with the design concept. Yeah,
Thank you so much for inviting me and having me over. It was a great
yeah,
experience. I think I wrote the talk for 30 minutes and I have been talking for over, I think, almost an hour. I think that's a great tribute to the questions, amazing questions that the audience has been asking. And I don't think we have covered a lot of different things. Like if I
Mhm,
title my talk something as broad as why do we design that, like if we start talking about that, that would obviously spill to maybe an entire day of talking about why do we need to design. So if any
mhm,
about it. That's my Twitter ID. Feel free to hit me up anytime and discuss more about design, products, building stuff. Or I also write code. So if you want to write code, you can hit me up. So
yeah,
yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you so much for having me. And you have been a terrific audience. Thank you for your amazing questions. And I kind of quite liked interacting with you all. So yeah, see you guys on the other side. Peace.
yeah. Bye, bye.
Hi guys.
So, thank you so much, viewers, for joining this amazing session. I hope this session will teach you about what is design and how design concepts work. So, please stay tuned and subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking the red bell icon and connect with us on LinkedIn and follow us on social media platforms. We are available on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. So all the links are in the description. And if you want to connect with Shubham, then I have provided the links of the social media in the description, so you can connect with them also. So this is me, Samajit Mai, signing off for the day. Thank you so much for joining this. So bye everyone. We will meet in next section.